My name is Julian Ward, and the last time I stood on campus at Coleridge Law School, I was bleeding through my collar. Funny how memory attaches itself not to the grand gestures or ceremonial moments, but to the sting of sweat in your eyes and the metallic taste of humiliation clinging to your tongue. That evening was supposed to be celebratory, a mixer hosted for rising third years, meant to forge connections and honor our collective grit. I helped fund that mixer, not because I wanted applause, but because Riley believed in supporting Melora's circle. "It's good politics," she'd said. And I nodded like a good husband, the way I always did when Riley spoke with that clipped certainty that made me question my own instincts. The courtyard twinkled with string lights, the kind meant to manufacture charm. A rented jazz trio played beside the punch bowl, and everyone was dressed like a LinkedIn had come to life. I wore a navy suit, my only tailored one. It fit me best around the shoulders, though I'd worn it enough to know the inner seam was beginning to fray. I stayed near the back, offering nods to familiar faces and pouring drinks for professors who no longer remembered my name. I didn't mind. I didn't come to impress. I came for Riley. For Melora. For whatever this performance was supposed to validate. And then she found me. Melora moved like someone who believed the ground existed to lift her higher. She wore a deep burgundy dress that clung to her frame like envy, and her heels clicked like punctuation marks across the stone. She always smiled like she knew a joke you hadn't earned the right to hear. I'd barely sipped my first glass of ginger ale when I felt the air change, like something cold pressing against the base of my neck. "Well," she said, as if amused to find me upright. "You clean up, predictably." I forced a half-smile. "Good to see you, Melora." "Oh, don't do that." Her hand flicked toward me like she was brushing off lint. "We're not pretending here, are we? You know your place." And then came the words that stuck. Not because they were clever, but because she meant every syllable. "You'll never be more than a clerk," she said, raising her wine glass as if toasting to my limitations. "Honestly, Julian, it's cute that you still show up. It really is." I should have walked away. Should have let it slide like I had a dozen other times, when she'd made snide remarks about my undergrad scholarship, or when she laughed at the way I thanked the caterers at our wedding. But that night, something in me curled inward and burned. It wasn't her voice, it was her smirk. That curled lip that suggested I was a stray dog at a black tie gala, and she was gracious just to acknowledge me. "I helped pay for this event," I said quietly, more to remind myself than her. "Oh, bless," she chuckled. "Then at least you're useful." She turned before I could speak again, already gliding back into the glitter of her friends, the high-born legal heirs and future prosecutors of America. I stood there, jaw clenched, pulse hammering beneath my tie. The music didn't stop. The world didn't shift. But I felt something snap just beneath my skin. Not rage. Not shame. Just clarity. I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because they needed me to believe I wasn't. I left the courtyard around 10, after Riley gave me a distracted kiss on the cheek and said she'd meet me at home. She stayed with Melora, of course. They always circled each other like coiled ribbon, one endlessly dramatic, the other endlessly excusing. I didn't press her. I didn't even text. I walked to the car with that awful wine glass echo still rattling around in my chest. "You'll never be more than a clerk." That phrase played on loop in my mind as I loosened my tie and turned the ignition. Clerk. The word sounded like a placeholder. Like the ghost of potential. And maybe that's what stung the most, not that she said it, but that Riley didn't stop her. But the worst part, the truly sharp edge of the night, came not at the mixer, but hours later. I was unlocking our front door when I heard footsteps behind me. Fast. Purposeful. I turned just in time to catch the outline of a man stepping up from the curb. Varsity build. Smug grin. And eyes like he'd already decided what I was. "You Julian?" he asked, as if it was a punchline. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He closed the distance in 2 strides, and before I could brace or speak, his fist crashed into my jaw. My head ricocheted off the side panel of the doorframe, and my vision flashed white-hot. Another blow, this time to my ribs. A knee, maybe. I stumbled sideways into the grass, choking on my own breath. "Melora says thanks," he muttered. I heard it clear as anything, and then he was gone. Just the crunch of gravel, the soft slam of a car door, and the faint rumble of tires disappearing into night. I lay there for a few minutes, maybe longer. The stars above me looked sharp, like they could cut skin. My collar was soaked, not with sweat this time, but with blood. Warm. Steady. I pressed a sleeve to my mouth and stood on trembling legs. I didn't call 911. I didn't scream or chase or beg. I just stood there, alone in the cold, and thought, so this is what it means to be beneath him. Not just rejected, but disposable. By the time I reached the bathroom mirror, my lip had split in 2 places. My eye was swelling, and blood had streaked my shirt like war paint. I cleaned up quietly, dabbed alcohol on the wounds. Didn't flinch. I knew Riley would ask questions. I knew she might not like the answers. But part of me hoped, desperately, that this would be the line. That finally, she'd see what they were doing. That she'd defend me. I didn't know yet that hope would be the next bruise. But I'd learn. Oh, I'd learn. One silent meal at a time. One lie wrapped in family loyalty. One assault dressed as a misunderstanding. And one file folder at a time. Because if I was just a clerk, then it was time I started documenting every piece of evidence they handed me. It happened in the quiet part of the building, the lower hallway by the faculty offices where the air always smelled faintly of old carpet and toner ink. That corridor never saw much foot traffic after noon, and by 4, it was practically a ghost tunnel. I was heading to my ethics seminar, binder under my arm, earbuds halfway in as I reviewed my outline for the class discussion. The weight of Melora's words from the mixer still clung to me like wet fabric. I'd done my best to walk through the last couple of days pretending they didn't matter. Pretending Riley and I hadn't barely spoken since the night I came home bleeding. But nothing prepares you for the moment someone decides you're not just forgettable, you're a target. I heard him before I saw him. Footsteps behind me. Confident. Measured. Not rushed, not hesitant. The kind of walk that said he already knew what would happen next. I turned the corner, and there he was, leaning against the lockers like he'd been cast in a bad college drama. Letterman jacket, though the school didn't do those anymore. Strong build, arrogant lean, that kind of jawline that always made people assume he was the hero. But I knew better. You learn fast in law school that the most dangerous people are the ones who believe the rules don't apply to them. Julian Ward, he said, like reading my name off a grocery list. I slowed, took the earbuds out. My pulse was already kicking up. That's me, I replied carefully, keeping my voice even. Can I help you? He stepped forward. Only a little. But it was enough to close the distance and remind me that he didn't come to talk. I recognized him then, Trevor Cade. I'd seen him around campus, usually surrounded by a group of guys who laughed too loudly and professors who gave him just enough latitude to let his ego bloat unchecked. Law student, junior trial team, wealthy background. Rumor was his dad bankrolled part of the west wing of the library, which, unfortunately, made him the kind of person the administration didn't touch unless they absolutely had to. Melora says hi, he said, and smiled like it was a joke. I blinked. Excuse me. She says thanks, he added, and then before I could speak again, before my brain even caught up, his fist connected with the left side of my face. Pain exploded through my cheekbone, and I staggered back into the lockers. The edge of the metal dug into my ribs, and the wind left my lungs so fast it felt like falling underwater. I didn't even get a full breath before his knee slammed into my stomach and dropped me to the floor like a rag doll. My head cracked against the tile. Vision blurred. Taste of blood in my mouth. Sharp, copper, familiar. I heard something in my side pop when he kicked me. Twice. Hard. Precise. I tried to roll away, to shield myself, but he grabbed my shirt collar and lifted just enough to slam me back down. You need to remember who you are, he hissed. You're not part of this world. You're a charity case with a clipboard. I think he wanted me to beg, or cry, or lash out. But I just stayed down, arm curled protectively around my ribs, blood trickling from my lip to the cold floor beneath me. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of hearing a plea. I wasn't going to hand him that. So I said nothing. I watched the ceiling spin. I counted his footsteps as he walked away. 5. That's how many steps it took for him to vanish. It took me longer to get up. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe more. I crawled toward the wall and used the locker handles to brace myself upright. Every breath felt like knives. My right eye was already swelling, and there was blood smeared across my palm from where I'd touched my nose. I remember thinking, if I go to the dean now, what will they say? Probably something polite. Probably something that blamed me for being in the wrong hallway. For looking at the wrong person the wrong way. People like Trevor didn't get punished. Not at Coleridge. Not when they were wrapped in donor money and Dean Harris's approval. Still, I made it to the bathroom. Locked the door. Stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked like someone halfway between a victim and a ghost. Shirt torn. Eye blackening. Lip split. But behind all that, Beneath the swelling and the red, I saw something else. Something I didn't quite recognize yet. Stillness. Cold, quiet, dangerous stillness. I cleaned myself up as best I could. Wet paper towels. Careful dabs. Shaking hands. I straightened my collar, packed my things, and walked out of that hallway like I hadn't just been kicked into the floor by someone who thought his fists were backed by bloodlines. I skipped ethics class that day. Instead, I went to urgent care. Told the nurse I fell. I knew better than to try explaining the truth without proof. She didn't press. She just stitched my lip and gave me an ice pack and a clipboard. While I waited for the doctor to return, I stared at that clipboard. Thought about what Trevor had said. You're not part of this world. You're a charity case. He wasn't wrong, not about the charity part. My scholarship covered half the tuition, and I worked 2 side jobs to handle the rest. I was used to carrying the weight of dreams other people were born into. But the thing about being underestimated is it gives you freedom. Freedom to observe, to prepare, to plan. People like Trevor? They never imagined someone like me could hold on to pain like a weapon. By the time I got home that night, the bleeding had mostly stopped. I walked into the kitchen. Riley was at the stove, stirring something half-heartedly in a pot. She turned when she heard the door, eyes scanning my face. She didn't gasp. She didn't run to me. She just stared. What happened? Trevor, I said, voice flat. He attacked me. She blinked. Did you provoke him? That was all she asked. Not, are you okay? Not why. Not what can I do. Just that, cold, clipped, and delivered with the same detached tone Melora used when asking for lemon in her water. I didn't answer, because I finally understood. This wasn't just about me and Trevor, or Melora, or Riley's silence. It was about the story they told themselves, that I was lucky to be in their orbit, lucky to be tolerated. And if I got hurt in the process, well, I should have known better. But I did know better now. I knew it down to the cracked ribs and broken skin, and I wasn't going to forget. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. I checked in by myself, holding a gauze-wrapped towel to my nose, dried blood tightening on my skin like brittle paint. I told the nurse I'd been assaulted, which earned a single raised brow but no real follow-up. She took my ID, gave me a clipboard, and told me to wait. My ribs ached when I breathed too deep. My eye was swelling shut, and my jaw clicked every time I tried to speak. But the pain was manageable, familiar, even. What I wasn't prepared for, what I hadn't rehearsed, was going home. By the time the attending stitched my lip and confirmed my nose wasn't broken, just badly bruised, it was after 8 p.m. I left with a prescription for painkillers and an ice pack I kept pressed against my side as I sat on the bus. We only had one car. Riley drove it that night. I stared out the window, watching buildings pass like blurred memories. My reflection in the glass looked like a warning. I sunken, skin pale, dignity hanging by a thread. The apartment was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace, but from avoidance. I could smell something faintly lemony in the kitchen, leftover chicken, maybe. The TV played low in the living room, one of those prestige dramas Riley liked where no one smiled and every character wore expensive coats. She was curled up on the couch, still in her blazer from work, wine glass in hand. She looked up when she heard the door, eyes falling on the bruises, the gauze, the limp I tried to hide. And for a single second, I thought maybe this would be the moment. The one where she'd rush forward, drop the glass, whisper my name like it mattered. Instead, she blinked slowly. What happened to your face? Trevor Cade happened, I said, lowering the bag and exhaling. In the faculty hallway. He jumped me. Said Melora sends her regards. Riley didn't move from the couch. She just shifted the glass between her fingers, watching the swirl of red like it was suddenly more important than the man standing in front of her with cracked ribs and dried blood on his collar. What did you say to him? I stared at her, trying to figure out if I misheard. What? To provoke him, she clarified, her tone cool, professional, like she was asking about a missed conference call, not the assault of her husband. I'm not saying it's your fault, Julian. You're not exactly subtle with Melora. Maybe you escalated things. The silence that followed was deafening, not the kind of silence that asks for comfort or gives space to grieve. No, this silence was a verdict. And in that moment, I knew I was alone. I didn't provoke anyone, I said, slow, careful. He came for me. He hit me, multiple times, told me I didn't belong here, that I was a leech. Riley stood now, finally. Set her wine down. She walked past me into the kitchen, opened the fridge like the conversation wasn't happening. You can't make this into some crusade, Julian. Noloris interviewing for federal clerkships next month. This isn't the time for drama. I let the word hang there. Drama. Like I was a high school kid who'd spilled soda on her notes. Like the bruises around my ribs were a misunderstanding we could iron out before brunch. She pulled out a Tupperware container and set it on the table. I saved dinner, she said. That was the only offering she gave. I sat across from her, gingerly, the stitches in my lip pulling with each movement. She spooned chicken onto my plate. The room felt heavy, thick with unspoken things. I chewed slowly, not because I was savoring anything, but because chewing hurt. Every bite reminded me of Trevor's fist. Riley didn't look at me. Not directly. She talked about her day, about how Melora's supervisor said she was destined for appellate work, how the firm might invite her to their networking retreat. I nodded in the right places, because I didn't know what else to do. She didn't ask again how I was. Didn't say she was sorry. She just talked, as if the wounds on my face were part of some temporary costume I'd chosen to wear. Halfway through dinner, her father called. I heard his voice on speaker, deep, dismissive. She told me what happened, he said. Trevor's a good kid. Must have been a misunderstanding. He broke my skin, I muttered. Well, he replied, next time, don't stir up drama during Melora's clerkship interviews. This isn't about you. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I felt something inside me dim. A small, warm ember that had kept glowing even after the blows. That ember flickered now. I looked across the table at Riley and realized she wasn't with me anymore. She hadn't been for a while. She'd chosen the narrative that made the least noise, the one where I was inconvenient, where Melora was ambitious and I was forgettable. After dinner, I washed the dishes. Slowly, painfully. Riley went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. I stood at the sink, hands in warm water, chest aching with every breath, and stared at the faucet like it might give me some kind of sign. That night, I lay on the couch. Not because she told me to, because I couldn't stand to sleep beside her and pretend things were normal. I watched the ceiling in the dark and listened to the hum of the fridge. And I thought about what her father had said. This isn't about you. But it was. They just didn't want it to be. Because if they admitted what happened, if they acknowledged the truth, then they'd have to reckon with what that said about them. About Melora. About the loyalty they gave to someone who weaponized it like a sport. I realized something else, too. I had no allies in that room. No defenders. I wasn't just alone that night. I'd been alone for months, maybe years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now I did. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to rage. That would give them something easy to dismiss. No, I would be patient. Strategic. Quiet. I'd stop asking for space at their table and start building my own. Because if the people who claim to love you can't hear your bruises, they don't deserve your voice. And Riley? She hadn't heard me in a long, long time. I didn't sleep the night after the silent dinner. I lay flat on the couch, cold creeping through the thin blanket Riley had tossed over the armrest, and stared up at the ceiling until it disappeared into darkness. My ribs throbbed, my lip pulsed with a dull ache, and my right eye felt like it had a heartbeat of its own. But it wasn't the physical pain keeping me awake. It was the knowing. The way Riley had looked at me, like she was more inconvenienced than alarmed. Like I'd embarrassed her by being attacked. There was something deeper in her silence than fear. It was allegiance, and it didn't belong to me. By morning, the swelling had gone down just enough for me to open my eye halfway. I shuffled to the bathroom, rinsed my mouth with salt water, then stood in front of the mirror with my phone. I took a photo, then another. Close-up of the stitches. Side angle of the bruising along my jaw. I used a second mirror to catch the discoloration down my ribs where Trevor's knee had landed. I documented everything. Every mark. At Coleridge, students whispered about Trevor like he was inevitable. He came from a family with money, the kind that gave endowments and had buildings named after them. But that wasn't what made him dangerous. What made him dangerous was how many people owed him favors, how many smiled at him because it was easier than confronting him. He had a way of speaking to professors like they were interns and laughing about things that never sounded like jokes. And worst of all, he knew he could get away with it. I wasn't about to retaliate physically. That would have made it easy for him. That would have fit their narrative. Angry scholarship kid lashes out. No. If I moved, it would be precise. Controlled. Undeniable. So I started with the obvious. I requested access to the hallway camera footage from campus security. They told me I needed a faculty sponsor to approve the request. I didn't argue. I went to Professor Levon, who had always nodded approvingly at my essays and once said I had quiet fire. I told him I needed the footage for a time-sensitive legal ethics scenario. He raised a brow. I didn't elaborate, but he signed the form. 2 days later, I had the footage. I watched it alone in the campus library, in the corner desk no one used because the air vent rattled. I didn't flinch as the video played. I didn't turn away when Trevor appeared on screen, when my figure turned the corner, when he struck me and I crumpled like a broken hinge. I watched the whole assault without pausing. Then I downloaded it. I saved it to 3 places: my laptop, a flash drive, and a password-locked cloud folder titled Clerkproof. The name came without thinking. I guess Melora's insult had branded itself deeper than I realized. You'll never be more than a clerk. I repeated it to myself as I labeled each file. Not because I believed her, but because I needed the reminder. The reminder that this wasn't just personal. This was systemic. This was what happened when the wrong people had too much power, and the right ones stayed quiet to keep their seats at the table. But video alone wasn't enough. I needed more. I reached out to Micah. Micah was a second year who interned part-time with campus IT. Quiet guy. Never got involved in drama. But he had access to the kind of systems that people like Trevor never considered vulnerable. I found him in the reading room, hunched over his laptop with noise-canceling headphones and a cup of gas station coffee. "Hey," I said. He looked up, saw my face, and slowly pulled the headphones off. "Jesus, Julian." "Long story," I said. "I need a favor." He nodded before I even finished the sentence. Micah helped me find the backup servers where airdropped files were logged during peer-to-peer transfers. At Coleridge, the network often saved residuals. Just fragments, but sometimes full packets, especially if the transfer happened on campus Wi-Fi. I told him I was looking for messages sent during a study session 2 weeks ago, specifically in the East Wing Lounge, 3rd floor. He typed for a few minutes, then turned the screen toward me. There it was. A file tagged group_study_PDFS from Melora's phone. But embedded inside, another transfer, a Note app snippet that had accidentally piggybacked on the same push. "Make sure Julian knows where he belongs." That's what it said. No context. No punctuation. Just a sentence, floating like a loaded gun in digital airspace. Micah handed me the file on a second flash drive. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He'd heard the rumors, same as everyone else. But now he'd seen something undeniable. I went back to my apartment that night and spread everything out. My laptop, my notes, the flash drives, my medical paperwork from the ER, even the screenshot of the message from Melora. I labeled each folder, organized timestamps, cross-referenced dates. I built it like a case file, a prosecutor's dream, or a time bomb, depending on how I used it. When I was done, I sat back in my chair and looked around the room. Riley was still at work, or with Melora. I didn't ask anymore. I didn't check. I wasn't sure which answer would hurt more. I didn't cry that night. Not out of numbness, and not because I was trying to be strong. I didn't cry because somewhere in the middle of building that file, the sadness had given way to something colder, something sharper. This wasn't grief anymore. It was calculation. They thought I'd lie down. They thought I'd let it slide. But I had every reason to remember. And now I had proof. Proof of the violence. Proof of the message. Proof of the culture that protected them while erasing me. I renamed the folder one more time. Version 1, Silence Hurts. Then I duplicated it and renamed the copy. Version 2, Silence Ends. And I stared at those 2 files, side by side, knowing it was only a matter of time before I had to choose which one the world would see. Micah kept checking over his shoulder when we walked to the dean's office together. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The nerves had burned out of me somewhere between the ER and the 4th round of organizing that file. What I felt now wasn't adrenaline, it was stillness. Cold, focused, quiet stillness. Micah had helped me compress the video, layer in metadata, timestamp the footage down to the frame. Every bruise had a matching log. Every second of Trevor's assault was clean, clear, and undeniable. I carried it all in a flash drive no larger than my thumb, sealed in a white envelope marked Academic Ethics Confidential. The kind of label no administrator ignores. Micah stopped walking right before the hallway turned. "You sure about this?" I nodded once. "I don't expect justice, Micah. I expect exposure. That's enough." He didn't say anything after that, just gave me a nod and disappeared into the library stairwell. I stood outside the dean's office, shoulders square, back straight, the pain in my ribs now dull and familiar. My fingers brushed the stitched edge of my lip, and then I knocked twice. The assistant looked up from her desk with the same detached smile she used on everyone, but it faltered for a split second when she saw my face. The fading bruise beneath my eye, the stiffness in my posture, the envelope in my hand. Maybe she'd already heard whispers. "Julian Ward," I said. "I have an appointment with Dean Harris." She motioned toward the door to the left. "They're waiting for you in conference room C." They. That word hung in my mind as I walked down the short corridor. Not just Harris. A panel. A buffer. An audience. They always sent more people when they wanted the illusion of process. Inside, the room was cold. A long oval table with 4 chairs already occupied. Dean Harris sat at the head. Beside him were Professor Gail Sorensen, head of student integrity, and Charles Langley, the school's general counsel. The 4th seat, I assumed, was for me. No one smiled. That was good. "Mr. Ward," Dean Harris said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." I slid into the seat, set the envelope on the table, and didn't speak. Langley folded his hands. "We understand you've come forward with evidence regarding a student altercation." I nodded once. "Assault. Documented, recorded, premeditated." Dean Harris sighed through his nose. "Before we begin, I'd like to stress that Coleridge takes student safety very seriously." "With respect, sir," I interrupted. "No, it doesn't." His eyes met mine, surprised. The air shifted slightly, as if I'd broken an unwritten rule. I leaned forward, calm. If Coleridge took student safety seriously, I wouldn't be the one building a case file in my bedroom. You'd already know what happened, because someone would have checked the cameras. Someone would have asked why I showed up at the ER with a fractured rib and a split lip. Professor Sorensen cleared her throat. "Mr. Ward, we're not here to debate protocol. We're here to review the evidence you've submitted." "Then review it," I said, sliding the envelope across the table. Dean Harris opened it slowly, producing the flash drive inside like it was radioactive. Langley plugged it into the port on the wall, and the flat screen lit up behind them. A single file folder appeared. Clerk proof, evidence compilation. The first clip began to play. The hallway. The silence. The ambush. Trevor driving my face into the lockers. The boot to my ribs. The blood. From multiple angles. Zoomed. Timestamped. No one spoke. Then the screen transitioned, still images of my injuries. Dated. Matched to hospital records. A short snippet of Melora's message. "Make sure Julian knows where he belongs." Then finally, a single line of narration in my voice, recorded the night before. When institutions don't punish violence, they inherit the silence that follows. The screen faded to black. 30 seconds of nothing. Just air and tension. Langley was the first to speak. "This is serious." Professor Sorensen leaned forward. "This would normally go directly to student conduct, but the involvement of donor families complicates." "Trevor's father," I said, "is a donor." "I know. You don't need to remind me who pays for the west wing of the library, or who sits on the endowment board." Dean Harris rubbed his temple like the weight of this was leaking into his bones. "Mr. Ward, what exactly is it that you want from this?" That was the moment. The one I'd been waiting for. The line they always use to steer things into manageable territory. Translate outrage into requests. Package pain into polite language. I sat back. Let them stew in the quiet for 3 full seconds. "For now," I said. "Nothing." Dean Harris blinked. "I beg your pardon?" I met his gaze directly. "I'm not asking for anything. No requests. No apologies. No settlements. What I want is for every person in this room to remember this moment. This silence. The way your stomach sank. The way your jaws locked up. Because one day, sooner than you think, someone else is going to walk into this office with a folder. And you won't be able to say you didn't know how this starts." Professor Sorensen looked at me differently then. Not with sympathy, but with something closer to recognition. Langley adjusted his tie. "This is highly unusual." I smiled faintly. "So is getting your face smashed in for marrying into the wrong bloodline." Dean Harris cleared his throat. "We will review the material and proceed with internal policy. If Mr. Cade is found in violation." "If," I echoed. He flinched. "Just a little." "When," he corrected. I stood. Straightened my jacket. "Good. You can keep the drive." Langley pushed his chair back. "We'll be in contact with you soon, Mr. Ward." I reached the door and paused. "One more thing." They looked up. I'm not the only one, I said. Others have stories. Others were afraid you wouldn't listen. I just wanted to confirm that fear was justified. Then I walked out. No fanfare. No raised voice. Just the quiet press of consequence trailing behind me. And when the door closed, I didn't feel lighter. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt deliberate. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about forcing the silence to stare itself in the mirror. And flinch. Healing took longer than I thought it would. Not the bruises, not the broken skin, but the way people looked at me afterward. Or didn't. The hallway incident didn't make the school paper, didn't appear in any email bulletin. Coleridge had a talent for burying its shame beneath well-worded policy memos and vague promises. The administration hadn't announced any sanctions against Trevor, and Melora still walked through campus like she owned the pavement under her heels. Riley and I were barely speaking. When she did say something, it was neutral, shallow, like we were two strangers stuck in the same apartment out of obligation. Her phone stayed face down on the counter. She went out more. Stayed later. Never brought up the hearing or the flash drive. I didn't push. Not yet. The bruising around my eye faded from purple to yellow. My ribs still ached when I laughed, if I ever did. But the pain helped. It reminded me this was real. That I didn't imagine it. That Trevor's fist had a ripple effect when I was still tracking. I attended classes, kept my head down, and watched. And I documented. Every apology muttered in passing. Every student who averted their gaze but whispered, that wasn't right. There weren't many, but there were enough. Enough to build weight behind the silence. Enough to know I wasn't imagining the shift. The school's national mock trial competition announcement came in early October. Trevor Cade's name was at the top of the lead speaker list. And just below it, listed under committee liaison in delicate serif font, was Melora Ward. That was when I knew. They hadn't learned a damn thing. The footage hadn't triggered any meaningful action. Not yet. Maybe they were still reviewing. Maybe they were negotiating with his father behind closed doors. Maybe they were just hoping I'd move on. Or maybe they just didn't care. But I did. And I wasn't done. Mock trial at Coleridge wasn't just a competition, it was a stage. Cameras. Donors. Alumni judges. The event was streamed on the school's website and edited into highlight reels for sponsorship grants. I knew the format well. I'd competed the year before, and while I hadn't made the finals, my team had placed second. I knew every protocol, every rule, every blind spot. They gave Trevor the spotlight again, even after what he'd done. Because to them, appearance mattered more than consequence. Melora was there at every planning meeting, sipping from expensive tumblers and offering insights like she was already clerking for the Supreme Court. I sat in the back of those meetings, not as a competitor this time, but as a research assistant assigned to fact-check witness scripts. A role no one paid much attention to. It gave me access. And invisibility. I watched Trevor rehearse in the old courtroom practice space, watched how he adjusted his tone, how he paused for emphasis, how he played to the jury even when there wasn't one in the room. He was good. He knew it. He moved like someone who'd never been told no, never been punished, never had to earn forgiveness because it was always given before the offense. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been collecting more than video. Micah helped me again. Quietly. He set up a private testimonial form, linked to a secure server, where students could report incidents anonymously. I called it Project Ledger. We seeded the link in campus group chats, hidden beneath the title Mock Trial Feedback Portal. Within 3 days, we had 7 entries. Within a week, we had 16. Stories of Trevor screaming at study partners. Pushing someone into a library table sophomore year. Humiliating a student during a live trial demo. One girl claimed he'd grabbed her wrist during a heated team debate and left a bruise. None of them had ever reported it formally. Who's going to believe me? One anonymous entry wrote. He's on every brochure. I compiled them all. I cross-referenced timelines. I found 2 matches with known disciplinary warnings. Not enough to bring him down. Not yet. But enough to draw a pattern. I formatted them into a PDF. A clean, concise document titled Behavioral Pattern and Witness Accounts. Cade, Trevor L. Then I made copies. Multiple copies. That was my way. No threats. No confrontations. Just precision. Let them believe I was still healing. Let them think I'd gone quiet. Melora certainly did. She passed me in the law library one afternoon, dropped a folder in front of me and said, "Try not to lose this one, clerk." She said it with a smile, one only I could hear beneath the civility. I looked up. "You know, I said softly. For someone so sure of herself, you work really hard to stay on top of people you claim are beneath you. She blinked, surprised by the tone. Then she leaned down, lowering her voice. You're lucky Riley still tolerates you. But push any harder, and you'll find yourself on the outside of everything. I've been outside, I replied. It's quieter there. Easier to hear the truth. She stood, rolled her eyes, and walked off. I didn't flinch. The truth was already loaded and waiting. 2 days before the mock trial finals, I printed my closing argument. Not for the trial. I wasn't a competitor, but I had a closing argument of my own to prepare. A closing argument wrapped in 15 pages of testimonial documentation, video timestamps, and policy contradictions. I printed it, bound it, and slipped it into a manila envelope. Then I added a flash drive containing the updated project ledger folder, including a side-by-side comparison of the school's code of conduct and how it had been ignored. The envelope was unmarked. I slid it under Professor Adira Lynn's door after dark. Professor Lynn was the chair of the ethics committee. Not political, not easily flattered. Sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. If there was anyone who still believed in integrity at Coleridge, it was her. That night, as I lay in bed, Riley finally asked, "Are you going to the trial?" I nodded. Even after all of this? I turned to her. Especially after all of this. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. She just rolled over, pulling the blanket up to her shoulder, and said nothing. That silence used to break me. Now it just confirmed everything I already knew. Melora texted Riley later that night. I saw it light up the screen while Riley was brushing her teeth. Tell your husband to behave tomorrow. No one wants drama on camera. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I was already packing my charcoal suit, the one I'd had tailored for last year's semifinals. Crisp shirt, polished shoes, a blue tie that Miriam, my mother, once said made me look like someone with purpose. I printed one more copy of the file. This one labeled, Final Submission. I slipped it into my leather briefcase, zipped it shut, and laid it on the chair by the door. Because I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to warn anyone. They'd written their own story. I was just making sure someone finally read it aloud. The morning air carried that sharp chill October always promised, but rarely delivered gently. I woke up before the sun broke over the skyline. The sky outside the window, a deep slate blue. Riley was still asleep, her body turned toward the wall, her breathing soft and even. She didn't ask where I was going. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. Whatever we were now, married, estranged, tolerating each other for the sake of optics, it didn't involve goodbyes anymore. I dressed in silence. Charcoal suit, the one I'd picked for last year's semifinals. I had ironed it the night before and hung it on the back of the door. The fabric was clean, pressed, and fitted to remind me I hadn't always been on the sidelines. White shirt, silver cufflinks. No one else would notice the details, but I did. This wasn't for them. This was for me. On the desk sat the flash drive. 16 gigabytes of carefully labeled files, indexed folders, internal memos, redacted student conduct reports, and the raw footage from the hallway. I checked the contents again, not because I doubted myself, but because I respected the gravity of what I was about to release. I opened the folders, confirmed the video still played, the testimonies were intact, the metadata re. She hated being unprepared and despised being blindsided. She would be in her office by 7:30 a.m., sipping her bitter black coffee and reviewing last-minute notes. That was the window. I left the apartment before Riley's alarm went off. No breakfast. Just a flask of lukewarm coffee and the knowledge that today wasn't about confrontation. It was about release. The kind of quiet unraveling that forces truth to surface whether anyone's ready for it or not. Coleridge's law building was nearly empty at that hour. The main atrium echoed with every step I took, the sound of my heels clicking against polished tile like punctuation. I didn't take the elevator. I walked up the stairs, slowly, carefully. Every breath still reminded me of the cracked rib Trevor had given me. But I welcomed the pain now. It was a kind of marker. A reminder that I'd survived what they thought would silence me. Lynn's office door was closed, light glowing faintly beneath it. I didn't knock. I slid the envelope under the door, let it disappear into the space between the hardwood and the carpet on the other side, and turned away. No fanfare. No second-guessing. Just movement. Just intention. I walked across campus to the student center and sat at one of the outside tables, facing the quad. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had done what I came to do. The rest was no longer in my hands. By 10 a.m., the mock trial venue was buzzing. The large lecture hall had been transformed into a courtroom, with bleachers set up in the back for observers, a dais for the judges, and a media booth already occupied by 2 student correspondents. The dean's office had spared no detail. A live stream team checked the mic levels. A sponsorship banner hung from the balcony. Coleridge Law, where leaders begin. I found a seat in the second row, far enough from the judges not to draw attention, but close enough to watch everything. I had no speaking role. I wasn't wearing a participant badge. I wasn't even supposed to be visible. But I was there, and that mattered. Trevor stood near the plaintiff's table in a perfectly fitted navy suit, hair sculpted into the same smug wave he always wore. He smiled at everyone like nothing had ever touched him. Not a bruise, not a complaint, not a single ounce of consequence. Melora stood at the edge of the stage, clipboard in hand, chatting with a donor from the Langford Foundation like she had a corner office already waiting for her after graduation. Riley was there too, sitting with the faculty spouses, her expression carefully neutral. When she caught sight of me, her eyes lingered for a moment too long. Then she looked away. The panel of judges arrived at 10:12, 2 retired state court judges and Professor Lynn. She walked in last, her expression unreadable, her satchel looped over one shoulder. She didn't look at me, didn't smile, didn't pause, but I saw it. The envelope in her hand. It was unsealed now, edges bent, contents reviewed. She sat down beside the other panelists, leaned in to whisper something to the technical coordinator, and handed over the flash drive. My pulse didn't spike. I just watched. Still, waiting. The trial began. Trevor opened with his usual flourish, confident, theatrical, delivering lines like a well-paid actor in a courtroom drama. His partner presented the case brief. The witnesses took their places. It was all rehearsed, practiced, controlled. Until it wasn't. Exactly 17 minutes in, as Trevor delivered the beginning of his first cross-examination, the large screens in the back, intended to display trial graphics and visual evidence, blinked. The PowerPoint disappeared. In its place appeared a static image, a time-stamped video still of the lower hallway. Me, Trevor. The moment his fist met my face, gasps rippled through the room. Trevor faltered mid-sentence. Objection, Your Honor, relevance. But this wasn't a scripted objection. This wasn't part of the trial. Professor Lynn stood. This is not evidence presented by the defense, she said, voice like ice. This is a special submission brought to the Ethics Committee's attention this morning. The screens lit up again. The footage played. No narration. No captions. Just raw video. Trevor's attack. The message from Melora. Snippets of witness statements. Faint audio of someone saying, he does this all the time. Trevor stood frozen, mouth slightly open, every ounce of practiced charisma bleeding out of his face. Melora's clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a slap. And Riley, she didn't look at the screen. She looked at me. For the first time in weeks, she actually looked at me. The room erupted. One of the judges stood up. The tech crew rushed forward, trying to stop the feed, but the file had been embedded into the main presentation system. It wasn't just plugged in. It was layered over every display cue. There was no off switch. Every second of the truth played out before the eyes of faculty, donors, students, and alumni. No accusations. Just facts. The trial was suspended. Trevor was escorted out by the dean himself, who tried, pathetically, to shield him from the cameras. Melora disappeared during the confusion, flanked by 2 students who whispered urgently in her ear. No one saw her return. The judges adjourned. The live stream ended in stuttering silence. I stood slowly, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the aisle. People parted for me. No applause. No confrontation. Just a quiet understanding. Something had shifted. Riley followed me out. Julian, wait. I stopped, turned, waited. She looked pale, her mouth parted like she didn't know which version of me she was speaking to, the clerk she ignored, or the man who just exposed everything her family tried to bury. I didn't know, she said. I tilted my head. That's what you said when she laughed at my scholarship. That's what you said after the mixer. After the hospital. After the bruises. How many times do you not know before it becomes who you are? She didn't answer. I walked away. Outside, the sun had broken fully across the quad. The breeze was sharp but cleansing. I paused on the edge of the steps, pulled the second flash drive from my pocket, and mailed it, no return address, to a local journalist known for reporting on academic integrity scandals. Let them all tell their stories. I had already told mine. No rage. No revenge. Just proof. And now, visibility. The auditorium didn't empty all at once, it unraveled. Like a dropped vase that doesn't shatter until it hits the floor, the silence following the footage was brief, held in breathless suspension. Then the murmurs started. Then the gasps. Then the sound of someone pushing back their chair hard enough to screech against tile. And then, finally, the movement. People rushed out, whispering, some outright talking now, phones out, eyes darting toward the faculty box where Professor Lin stood with a poise so cold and precise it felt like she'd orchestrated the entire thing. She hadn't. I had. But she knew how to read a moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. Dean Harris was halfway down the aisle when he turned and saw me, our eyes locking like something unsaid passed between us. He looked betrayed, not because of what I had done, but because of who had seen it. This wasn't just about me and Trevor anymore. This was about the institution's image. Coleridge Law wasn't just a school, it was a brand. And brands don't bleed. But now the blood was on display in 1080p, echoing across live stream replays and Twitter threads that had already started cropping up the minute the video began. Trevor had gone pale when the first clip played, his hands frozen mid-gesture during his cross-examination. He didn't shout, didn't deny it. He just stood there, mouth half open, watching the moment his power unraveled in real time. When he tried to speak, tried to object or redirect, Professor Lin raised a hand, and for once, Trevor obeyed. Not out of respect, out of understanding. This was no longer his courtroom. Nalora had fled first. She'd knocked over her bag when she stood, scattering flashcards and a branded water bottle across the floor. She didn't even bother to pick them up. She disappeared through a side door, not even looking at Riley or the panel or me. Just gone, as if she could outrun what she'd helped create. And Riley, she didn't move at all. She sat stiff, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap like she could hold the moment together if she just didn't blink. But I saw her face. Not confusion. Not concern. Guilt. The kind that finally bubbles when the mirror no longer lies. I didn't leave right away. I stood beside my seat, letting the tide wash past me. Students murmuring my name, professors avoiding my eyes, donors looking furious and uncertain. I watched them all scramble to salvage dignity from a stage that had burned right through the floorboards. What none of them seemed to understand was that I hadn't destroyed anything. I had only removed the curtain. It was Professor Lin who finally approached me, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You timed it well," she said quietly. "I didn't time anything," I replied. "I just gave you the truth." She gave a subtle nod, arms crossed. "You realize what happens next? Likely suspension, possibly formal hearings. Panic, PR damage control, and maybe, if you're lucky, reform." She studied me for a moment. I wasn't asking what happens to the school. I looked down at my shoes. I know. And I did. This wasn't going to make me popular. The school would spin the narrative. I'd be labeled disruptive, opportunistic. Nalora would claim manipulation, Trevor would cry character assassination, and Riley's family would circle their wagons tighter than ever before. But none of that mattered. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hiding bruises behind polite smiles. I wasn't standing in the back of the room waiting for someone to offer me a seat. I wasn't just surviving. I was seen. I left the auditorium just as campus security arrived, not for me, ironically, but for Trevor. I didn't stop walking. Didn't flinch when two administrators passed me in the hallway, whispering rapidly into their phones. I made my way across campus, through the crisp wind, past students staring at their phones as the video clip continued to circulate. I'd never asked to be the center of anything, but now I was, and I wasn't ashamed of it. By the time I reached the front steps of the law building, Riley was already waiting outside. She stood alone, arms folded, jaw tight, watching me like she wasn't sure whether to apologize or accuse. I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch. "I didn't know she sent that message," she said finally, her voice small. "Which one?" I asked. "The one telling Trevor to make me bleed, or the one warning me not to embarrass her during the competition?" She winced. "I didn't read everything." I stared at her. "You didn't need to. You were there for most of it." She blinked, then took a step closer. "Julian, I didn't think it would go that far." "No," I said. "You didn't think it would reach you." There it was. The real truth. She'd spent the last 2 years managing perception, hers, Meloris, the family's. I was never a partner. I was a risk. A favor she had to explain. An ambition she had to defend. And when that favor started bleeding in front of her, she flinched, not because she cared, but because it was inconvenient. I didn't know how to help, she said weakly. You don't help someone by questioning their pain, I said. You help them by believing it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words she wanted to say floated behind her eyes, but never crossed her lips. She knew I was right, but knowing had never been her problem. Acting on it had. I stepped around her and started walking. Julian, she called. I didn't stop. Please don't let this be the last time we talk. I paused at the curb, turning just enough to meet her eyes. That depends, I said. Next time we talk, are you bringing honesty or just damage control? She didn't answer. So I kept walking. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my shoes slowly. The adrenaline had faded. What remained was exhaustion, not regret, not guilt, just a heaviness that came from finally letting go of what I'd carried too long. The file had done what it needed to do. Now came the aftermath. There would be hearings, policies reviewed, donors calmed, statements released. And somewhere in all of that noise, maybe, just maybe, someone else would realize they weren't alone. Maybe someone else would build their own file, stand their own ground, speak. And maybe next time, the silence wouldn't win. I picked up my phone, opened the photo I'd taken weeks ago, the first one, with the blood and swelling. I stared at it, then deleted it. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed the evidence. The world had finally seen the bruise. And this time, it flinched. They posted the notice quietly, like shame folded into an administrative memo. No headline. No email blast. Just a bulletin board update near the dean's office, a single sheet of paper, sealed in plastic, with carefully worded language that said everything without admitting anything. Effective immediately, Trevor Cade has been placed on indefinite academic suspension pending formal investigation. The Office of Student Conduct and the Ethics Committee will conduct a thorough review of the allegations and materials presented. No mention of the video. No acknowledgement of the damage. Just suspension. Indefinite. The word they use when they don't want to say expelled, but still want to create distance. Melora's consequences came next. Slower, quieter. She wasn't suspended. Of course not. But her name was removed from the postgraduate judiciary pipeline. Her interview with the Seventh Circuit? Cancelled. Faculty recommendation withdrawn. They cited concerns raised about conduct unbecoming of a peer review candidate, which meant, we saw the footage, and we'd rather not defend you in front of a federal judge. She filed an appeal, of course. Submitted a 6-page rebuttal full of legal jargon and circular logic. Claimed she never explicitly instructed Trevor to harm me. That it was a joke, a misunderstanding, a private message taken out of context. She'd never intended for violence, never encouraged hostility, and my personal favorite, had no reason to believe her words would be weaponized. Except they were. And I was the one left bleeding on the hallway floor. I read her appeal when Micah forwarded it to me from a student rep on the committee. I didn't flinch. I didn't even get angry. It was like watching someone try to mop up gasoline with a paper napkin. Melora didn't understand remorse. She understood power. And the moment that power cracked, she grabbed for the nearest defense, ignorance. Riley came home 2 days later holding 2 bags of groceries and a soft apology on her lips. I didn't answer the door when she knocked. I let her unlock it with her key, walk inside, and find me sitting at the kitchen table reviewing outlines for civil procedure. I brought your favorite, she said gently. Lemon ginger tea. And the peanut butter you like, the crunchy one. I didn't look up. You don't know what my favorite is. Her voice caught. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. She set the bags on the counter and just stood there, waiting for me to make it easier for her. I didn't. I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it the way I had during so many dinners where my bruises were never acknowledged and my voice was something she filtered through family loyalty. I didn't know it would go that far, she said finally. Trevor. I thought he'd just say something. Make you feel small. Not send me to the hospital? I said, voice sharp but even. Not leave me bleeding on a hallway floor while your sister toasted herself in the mixer I helped pay for? I didn't know, she said again. I stood slowly, pressing my palms to the table to steady myself. That line? You've used it so many times it stopped meaning anything. You didn't know when she mocked my scholarship. You didn't know when she laughed during our wedding toast. You didn't know when Trevor showed up at our building. And you sure as hell didn't know when she told you to warn me to behave before the trial. Riley opened her mouth, closed it. The weight of truth pressed her backward a step. I walked past her, into the bedroom, and returned with an envelope. I handed it to her without ceremony. She stared at it for a second, like she couldn't believe what she was holding. Then she opened it. Her hands trembled when she saw the papers. I already signed, I said. It just needs yours. She looked up, tears swelling in her eyes but refusing to fall. Julian, this is divorce. Yes, I said. This isn't revenge, Riley. It's clarity. The words hung there like final chords in a song neither of us wanted to sing anymore. I thought we could work through it, she whispered. I thought, after everything, maybe we could rebuild. We can't rebuild something you never protected, I replied. I stood beside you while your family used me as a placeholder. I stayed quiet because I thought love meant endurance. But all it did was make me invisible. She looked like she wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Maybe because she knew deep down, I was right. Maybe because she'd cried her tears long before this moment, back when her loyalty started slipping toward her sister and never circled back to me. I loved you, she said. I believe you, I replied. But you didn't stand up for me. And love without loyalty? It dies in silence. She didn't sign the papers that night. She left the envelope on the counter and walked out with her keys dangling from her hand. Her shoulders hunched like she finally understood what it meant to lose something you can't guilt back into place. I didn't chase her. I had chased enough. The following week, the Ethics Committee formally released its internal report, an in-house document that would never go public but circulated fast enough among students and faculty to shift the wind. Trevor's record now included a physical misconduct citation, which meant law firms who saw it would quietly slide his resume into the recycling bin. Melora's judicial prospects were officially closed. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just absence. She stopped attending classes. Her name stopped appearing on rosters. And eventually, she faded. But I didn't. I rose. Top of my class. Offers from firms I hadn't even applied to. Recommendation letters from professors who once couldn't place my name but now remembered the footage and the way I stood after the fall. And then an email from Judge Meredith Chan's office. She'd seen the story. Read the file Micah had leaked online. You've lived through more than you've written about, she wrote. We could use that kind of steel on this bench. You ever think about clerking? I stared at that line for a long time. Then I smiled. Because no matter how many times they called me just a clerk. It turns out, the word holds more power than they ever understood. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, just in presence. Clean lines, glass walls, dark wood panels polished to perfection. It didn't hum with drama like the lecture hall's at. I stood slowly, pressing my palms to the table to steady myself. That line? You've used it so many times it stopped meaning anything. You didn't know when she mocked my scholarship. You didn't know when she laughed during our wedding toast. You didn't know when Trevor showed up at our building. And you sure as hell didn't know when she told you to warn me to behave before the trial. Riley opened her mouth, closed it. The weight of truth pressed her backward a step. I walked past her, into the bedroom, and returned with an envelope. I handed it to her without ceremony. She stared at it for a second, like she couldn't believe what she was holding. Then she opened it. Her hands trembled when she saw the papers. I already signed, I said. It just needs yours. She looked up, tears swelling in her eyes but refusing to fall. Julian, this is divorce. Yes, I said. This isn't revenge, Riley. It's clarity. The words hung there like final chords in a song neither of us wanted to sing anymore. I thought we could work through it, she whispered. I thought, after everything, maybe we could rebuild. We can't rebuild something you never protected, I replied. I stood beside you while your family used me as a placeholder. I stayed quiet because I thought love meant endurance. But all it did was make me invisible. She looked like she wanted to cry. But the tears didn't come. Maybe because she knew deep down, I was right. Maybe because she'd cried her tears long before this moment, back when her loyalty started slipping toward her sister and never circled back to me. I loved you, she said. I believe you, I replied. But you didn't stand up for me. And love without loyalty? It dies in silence. She didn't sign the papers that night. She left the envelope on the counter and walked out with her keys dangling from her hand. Her shoulders hunched like she finally understood what it meant to lose something you can't guilt back into place. I didn't chase her. I had chased enough. The following week, the Ethics Committee formally released its internal report, an in-house document that would never go public but circulated fast enough among students and faculty to shift the wind. Trevor's record now included a physical misconduct citation, which meant law firms who saw it would quietly slide his resume into the recycling bin. Melora's judicial prospects were officially closed. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just absence. She stopped attending classes. Her name stopped appearing on rosters. And eventually, she faded. But I didn't. I rose. Top of my class. Offers from firms I hadn't even applied to. Recommendation letters from professors who once couldn't place my name but now remembered the footage and the way I stood after the fall. And then an email from Judge Meredith Chan's office. She'd seen the story. Read the file Micah had leaked online. You've lived through more than you've written about, she wrote. We could use that kind of steel on this bench. You ever think about clerking? I stared at that line for a long time. Then I smiled. Because no matter how many times they called me just a clerk, it turns out the word holds more power than they ever understood. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, just in presence. Clean lines, glass walls, dark wood panels polished to perfection. It didn't hum with drama like the lecture halls at Coleridge. It breathed power in silence. The kind of space where words mattered. I stood straight in my tailored suit, a sharp, note-taking pad beside me. Chan moved through her docket with precision. Her voice but restraint mattered more. And I had a seat now. Not in the gallery. Not on the sideline. At the table, behind Judge Meredith Chan. Absolute. She didn't waste syllables. She didn't tolerate grandstanding. She looked at every case like a puzzle, not a performance. When I'd interviewed with her, she said, I don't want a show. I want insight. You've got more insight in your scars than most do in their lectures. She'd read my file. The real one. The one I had built. She knew what happened at Coleridge. She didn't flinch when I told her about the video, the bruises, the silence, or the fallout. She didn't offer sympathy either. Just respect. That's all I ever wanted. I clerked beside 3 other law graduates, brilliant, polished, and curious about me. At first, they tiptoed around my name. Then one of them asked during lunch, Hey, were you the guy from the Coleridge video? The trial. I looked up from my salad. Yeah. That was me. They nodded. No judgment. No spectacle. Just recognition. Good, he said. That needed to happen. Now, months into the job, I'd stopped looking over my shoulder. Stopped bracing for backhanded compliments or disguised pity. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was contributing. Every case I reviewed, every draft opinion I worked on, every footnote I edited, it felt earned. I saw Trevor's name again once. Briefly. A civil arbitration filing in a national database. Assault suit. Private dispute. No details. No glory. Just consequences. Quiet ones. Melora? She never reapplied to the judiciary track. Rumor had it she transferred out of state, changed her name on LinkedIn, started over in a place where nobody knew what happened. But starting over doesn't erase the past. It just changes the lighting.